Alright, we are wrapping up our lecture videos this week by talking about how skeletal muscles are named. So, most of the muscle names and the roots of them are based in Latin and Greek because they were the first groups of people to do studies on the human body, at least in Western culture. And so all of the materials that were published and what modern day anatomy here in Western culture is based off of are keeping these Latin and Greek based names. So kind of knowing how these muscles are named and what those Latin and Greek roots are can kind of help remember where those muscles are located, what they do, and stuff like that. So Latin-based names, these can be a little bit more straightforward sometimes because English is loosely a Latin-based language in a lot of ways, not exclusively, but in a lot of ways. So, for example, the abductor digiti minimi. So, abductor, we've talked about abduction as an action in the articulations videos that you may find helpful to go rewatch. But ab is away from, duct is to move, so abduct is muscle that moves away from something. Digiti is the Latin root digitus, which means digit. We know that the digits are the fingers and toes. We don't have a second Latin root here, but this is going to refer to a finger or toe. So next up is the minimi part. This is a pretty obvious one. Minimus means mini or tiny, so little. And so the translation for the abductor digiti minimi muscle is a muscle that moves the little finger or toe away from something. On the flip side, we have an adductor digiti minimi. So we won't go over the digiti and minimi parts, but adductor, ad means to or towards, duct still means move, so this is a muscle that moves towards something. So the adductor digiti minimi is a muscle that moves the little finger or toe towards something. Second part of naming skeletal muscles can be that they are named according to a variety of criteria that describes those muscles in some way. These descriptions can be based on the shape of the muscle, the size of it compared to other muscles in the area, where it's found in the body, where its attachments to the bones are, how many origins it has, and or the action that it does. So one example is the frontalis muscle. This is a muscle located on top of the frontal bone that we just learned last week with the bones of the skull. For the buttocks, the size of the muscle is going to influence the names. So the gluteus maximus is the largest of those muscles, the gluteus medius is the medium-sized one, and the gluteus minimus is the smallest of those three. Names can also indicate the length of the muscle. So brevis means short, longus means long. So we'll see this next week with some of the muscles of the forearm. We have the extensor carpi radialis longus and extensor carpi radialis brevis. They're going to do the same action, but one is much longer than the other. Names, again, can indicate location also, so muscle names that have the word lateralis in them. This is something that's towards the outside, away from the midline. Medialis is going to be towards the midline. And so there are some examples of this with muscles in the leg that we'll learn next week, like the vastus lateralis and vastus medialis. Again, these are both going to do the same action, but one is located laterally on the side of the leg, the other is located more medially. Names can indicate the direction of the fascicles relative to the midline. So rectus means straight. So we'll learn the rectus abdominis in lab this week. This is a muscle that runs up and down the midline of the body. This is the six-pack muscle, is the rectus abdominis. Oblique muscles, these are going to be at an angle, so oblique means to be at an angle. We also are going to learn the internal and external obliques this week, so these are other ab muscles that the fascicles are arranged at an angle, and these muscles are going to be kind of out on the side, so a lot of you have probably done crunches for the oblique muscles before. Another one is the quadriceps muscles. This is a number of muscles in a group. So our quadriceps muscles is a group of 4 muscles on the anterior side of the thigh area. And we'll learn those next week. Again, some names can indicate the number of origins that a muscle has. So the biceps brachii has 2 origins, or 2 heads. And then the triceps brachii has 3 origins. So again, the prefix bi means 2, the prefix tri means 3. So the triceps brachii muscle has 3 origins, or 3 heads is sometimes what it's called. And then the attachments for muscles sometimes appear in the name. So when the name of a muscle is based on these attachments, the origin, so that fixed point of the muscle, is always going to be the first part of that name. So one muscle that we will learn in lab this week is the sternocleidomastoid. Sterno for sternum, cleido for clavicle, mastoid for the mastoid process on the temporal bone. All right, so knowing that gives you an idea of where this muscle is located already. It is going to be in the neck area, connected both to the sternum and clavicle and the mastoid process of the temporal bone and the skull. And then names can indicate actions. So this is going to be especially true next week when we do muscles of the forearms, and then just a couple of the muscles that are going to be in the leg. But flexors are going to decrease the angle of a joint. Extensors are going to increase the angle of a joint. We see this with all of the muscles in the forearm. So we will learn flexors of the forearm. These are muscles that are going to be on the palm side of the forearm, so the anterior side. These are going to flex the wrist and fingers. And then on the posterior or back side of the forearm are all of our extensor muscles that are going to extend the wrist or fingers. And then we have abductors and adductors. Abductors are going to move that bone away from the midline of the body. We'll see that with a couple muscles in the legs, and then adductors moves the bone towards the midline. So we've got a couple muscles in the leg, the adductor longus and adductor magnus, that are going to adduct at the hip. And that is going to wrap up all of our lecture videos for this week. These slides are still posted with all of the rest of these slides in here, just for your benefit. But not all of the muscles that are named or listed in the rest of these slides or the textbook are going to be ones that we cover in lab material. So pay attention to that list of lab terms that you're required to know, and ignore anything on these slides that is not listed in those lab terms. So we will cover like the temporalis and masseter muscles, but we are not covering these pterygoids, lateral or medial. All right. So I'm posting the rest of these slides to just kind of help you out as another study aid, but these pictures are also found in the book. So covers muscles of the axial skeleton, so head, neck, and torso, abdominal region, stuff like that, muscles of the pelvic floor and perineum, appendicular muscles of the pectoral girdle and upper limbs, so shoulder and arms. We're not getting into muscles of the hand and fingers specifically, and then muscles of the pelvic girdle and lower limbs, so hip, leg, knee, stuff like that. All right, so that wraps up week 6? I think it's week 6 right now.